So I voted for Biden this year, and obviously I wasn't super excited about it. I'm a socialist, and Biden is a neoliberal war hawk, or you might say chicken hawk, which is a word for politicians who are more secretive about the wars that they do, which is definitely a good description for Biden when compared to Trump. But like I said, I voted for him, the lesser of two evils. And the main reason I voted for him, though, was because he promised to be the most pro-union president it's in like 50 years, since FDR maybe, the country's ever seen. I don't know, he made some hyperbolic statement. So I want to reflect on what Biden's done thus far politically, and if he's followed through on his unionization efforts, which are kind of the saving grace for me. What I'm looking at, and I'm like, oh, please tell me that voting for this guy wasn't a huge waste of time, and I didn't just get bullied into the position by loudmouth liberals. But I don't think I did. But let's watch one of my TikToks I made about Biden, then I'll come back and talk some more. Let's run down the Biden administration so far real quick. We found out his student loan forgiveness plan hardly does anything. He changed the name of the cages that we're putting immigrants in. He threatened Nicaragua, appointed a cabinet of warmongers, and held a nice ceremony for the people who died of COVID. Young adults are still waiting on our checks, but it's nice that you had the ceremony, Joe. Thank you. And while this is happening, CNN is still doing coverage about how Trump failed us in the pandemic, and hyperbolic coverage of Trump's impeachment trials. It's almost like CNN doesn't actually care about real issues facing Americans. It's almost like they're trying to convince you that Trump is your real enemy, so that you won't realize your true enemy is the entirety of the capitalist class, who own both the media and the government. All right, so let's go in depth a little bit on some of the things I talked about. First, let's talk about Nicaragua, because not a lot of people know about this because it doesn't make headline news. But Anthony Blinken, who's got some position in the administration in relation to foreign policy, I can't remember the exact position, but he tweeted at Nicaragua, at Daniel Ortega, you better change course right away, otherwise we will take action or whatever. And what Nicaragua did to elicit overt, open public threats from members of the U.S. State Department very close to the president was they kicked U.S.-backed NGOs out of the country, saying they were backing regime change and that they weren't actual NGOs, they were biased towards the U.S. State Department, which we know this is what NGOs are. We know Nicaragua's claims are legitimate, and they have a right to kick these nefarious NGOs out of their country and label them as terrorist organizations. But the U.S. wants these NGOs in Nicaragua to do regime change. So they told Nicaragua they better change course or the U.S. is going to act soon. So he threatened them. He's promised to continue or to form a multilateral effort against China. He thinks Trump has isolated the U.S. in their war against China, and Biden would like to ally with other imperial powers to put their boot down on China and stop China from growing and stop China from forming this counter hegemony to Western power economically. He invited a Venezuela coup leader to be his inaugural guest at the White House. Someone who literally tried to overthrow the Venezuelan government. Joe Biden said, come to Washington, D.C. We would love to have you as an esteemed guest at the White House for what you did in trying to overthrow the democratically elected government of one of our enemies. He appointed someone very close to Susan Rice, who was one of the architects to Libya, and someone who had defended Susan Rice and been close with Susan Rice. He renamed the border cages to migrant detention facilities or whatever. If you don't know, we had a petition, Midwestern Marxist did, that got something like 100,000 or 90,000 signatures demanding that Joe Biden release every child from a cage on day one. And, you know, this doesn't seem like that strong of a demand. He promised to be better than Trump, right? Trump was this horrendous dictator putting children in cages. Well, Biden's done nothing but rename the cages, and liberals and CNN and the liberal media have done nothing but make excuses for him. I've talked about this and they said, no, Biden just can't do it right now. There's not enough places to put these kids. It's like, how about put them in a hotel? Right? The military budget's $700 billion, and you're telling me all we can afford is a detention facility with horrible living conditions for children who are fleeing war-torn countries. Put them up in a hotel, Joe. Come on. Lesser of two evils, baby. We found out his student debt plan was very toothless. I'm not going to talk about that in depth because I don't know about it in depth. My buddy James has a great video about it on TikTok. I think James Ray or James Gets Political. That's his username. Check it out if you want, or just look it up. It's actually been reported on in mainstream media how weak Biden's student debt relief plan is. And the amount of COVID deaths has hit 500,000. And of course, that isn't exactly Biden's fault. He inherited it from Trump, and it's mostly capitalism's fault how unable our system has been, or how much our system has failed and how many people have died in this pandemic. People are being forced to go to work so they can pay their rent. The government has provided no bailout. Private entities are not just letting their workers stay home because it's safer, because they need to make a profit. And Biden promised to fix all this, and you knew that was bullcrap. Because, like I said, the root of the problem is capitalism, but he acted like, I won't deny COVID. I won't say it's a ruse. I won't say it was invented by China the same way Trump was. And it's like, congrats. You're not a complete moron like Trump, but you've still done nothing to help people. You haven't nationalized wages. You haven't strengthened OSHA, which multiple lawsuits were filed against OSHA during the Trump administration for people working in meat packing facilities where they would be put side by side on the meat packing line with no PPE, no protection to make sure they didn't get COVID. And then they would contact OSHA, who's supposed to be an agency from the government who protect workers, and OSHA would call the employers. This is well documented. This was happening all over the country. They would call the employers before doing an inspection, which they're not supposed to do. The inspections are supposed to be unannounced and random, so you can tell if these employers are actually screwing over their workers. So OSHA would call them, say, hey, we're doing an inspection. The companies would have their workers stand 6 feet apart, put on their PPE. OSHA would come in, do the inspection, say everything's good, leave, and then it would be back to normal the next day. I'm not kidding you. I can link the stories in the description. This was happening all over the country. Did Joe Biden strengthen OSHA? That's something he could actually do with the executive office. He could make a huge push to strengthen OSHA. But he's not going to, because his loyalty isn't to the working class, it's to corporations. And possibly his worst offense of all, of course, has been appointing Neera Tanden and Pete Buttigieg, two of the most condescending, wealthy liberals I have ever seen in my life. Two people whose personalities just really get on my nerves. The way they loudly condemn anybody who advocates for single-payer healthcare and says, you dirty progressives, won't you just fall in line with the Democratic Party? Quit asking for healthcare. That was basically the campaign of Pete Buttigieg, and that's basically Neera Tanden's personality on Twitter, is telling progressives why they're selfish, dirty, poor people who don't deserve anything, and those are exactly the kind of people that Biden wants to put in his administration. Pete said he was going to build a lot more rail. I would love that. I'd love to see more high-speed rail. He hasn't done it at all. So what are the good things? Why am I looking back now and not, openly saying I regret voting for Biden? Because he appointed Marty Schwartz. Marty Schwartz is the guitar guy on YouTube. He does guitar tutorials. Marty Walsh. He appointed Marty Walsh to be his labor secretary. And this is one of the very first labor secretaries we've had from the union, or from the unions in like 50 some years, or he is the first one in like 50, 60 years or something like that. And that's good. And I've heard from some workers on the ground that there's been a little bit more communication than there has been between the Trump administration and the unions. But ultimately, our unions have been devastated and they need to be built up from the ground level up. And, most people are leaving union jobs to go be owner operators and work for themselves because it works better for them, and that's how the ruling class knows they can stop the most important sectors of our economy from organizing themselves and really demanding the government do some serious things at the threat of withholding their labor, which makes the whole economy run. So having Marty Schwartz as labor secretary, I said Marty Schwartz again. Marty Walsh as labor secretary is a great thing if he actually does anything, right? If organized labor is able to gain a foothold over the next 4 years. And then the other good thing is that we are able to shift people's lens from seeing Democratic Party and liberals versus Republicans and Conservative Party and say, no, they are the same. It is political theater. Liberal democracy is nothing but a shell for capitalism. What you need to see things as is owners and workers. It's not Democrats, it's not left and right, liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans. It's those who own and those who work. That's the only lens you really need. That's not true. I mean, there's still like racial differences and stuff like that. But ultimately, as far as enacting political change and societal change, the main thing you need to realize is workers, those are your friends. These are the people we need to organize. And then there's owners. These are the people screwing you over. These are the people who determine how production is carried out. Meaning, if they don't want to give you protection during a pandemic, they don't have to. And they also own the government, so the government's not going to do it. And in fact, the government's going to do things like bust unions and throw people in jail to make sure that companies are still profiting off the prison industrial complex. And yeah, so we need to be showing people that, look, Biden's the same thing. He promised you with all his heart. All the liberals said, no, he's the lesser of two evils. He's going to be so much different. It's not true. He's a corporatist. His loyalty is to the owners, and our loyalty needs to be to the workers, and the workers need to gain a foothold in this time as much as they can. All right, so that's my socialist, Marxist opinion on Joe Biden's presidency thus far. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave comments, questions, concerns in the comments. Tell me what you think of Joe Biden thus far as a Marxist, which hopefully you are. If not, you can still tell me how Joe Biden's doing. If you're a liberal, be quiet. All right, peace.